Prosperity in Black America. What will this require? Is Black business prospering? Are we reaching women and minority-owned businesses? How do we achieve earning parity for wealth for our families? Do our children really have access to education? Will our families have choices for our children? Prison pipelines, mass incarceration, tearing our families apart. A healthcare system not accessible to the masses. The disproportionate termination of Black women from corporate America. When will we actually begin to address what's really at play? How do Black people gain more power to help make these changes? This requires a lot of political will and courage. I'm that provocateur of change. I am Cindi Bright. Welcome to HeartBeat. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to HeartBeat. I am your host, Cindi Bright. Thank you for joining us this evening as we are geared up. Summer's over. Labor Day's happened, and it's back to school. And so much is happening that we want to talk about today. Maybe I should say it's back to school shootings today. But we wanted to dive into talking about what I'm calling the morning after. Over the last couple of weeks, we had the Democratic National Convention. We were thrilled to have our delegation here in Washington State attend, along with our chair of the Washington State Democrat, Shasti Conrad. She is here with us this evening to talk about what that experience was like, being there, but more importantly, kind of what's happening post that convention. What should we be thinking about doing, focusing on the next 62 days? Joining me this evening as co-hosts, welcoming in Stefani Coverson and Erin Jones, who are here every week with us to talk about all things politics, all things education, all things Black Girl Magic, all the things we break down every week. Good evening, ladies. How are you?
Good to be here.
I'm a little hoarse today. Hi, Steph. How are you? Good. Well, with no further ado, I want to welcome in Shasti Conrad because she, let's bring her in. She's been on a few times, but I'm excited to have her back in to talk with us this evening. Shasti, welcome back to HeartBeat this evening. She's got her cowboy hat on. Let's talk about that cowboy hat.
Before it gives everyone a seizure, I'll take it off. But we just had to show off the hats from the Democratic National Convention that our delegates wore. We just had such a wonderful time. It really was joyful and hopeful and optimistic. And I've maybe never felt the Democratic Party feel this united. And I think a real clarity of purpose of what we need to do, the time frame that we're on, and it's like a real, we understand the assignment, and it's just it's been a real joy. I'm still riding the high from that week.
I'm still riding the high with you. I wasn't even there, but I will say that this is the first time in a long time that I put the laundry aside. I put off studying and cooking dinner. I was really sitting down, watching and listening. It was so engaging and joyful. And that joy isn't supposed to be a legitimate strategy, but fear-mongering is. It's interesting that was the critique when all was said and done.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever watched as much of the DNC as I did this time. And just because of the work I do when I serve in a lot of rural spaces, I watch the RNC too, as much as I could tolerate. And just the sheer difference between the two was wild. I mean, I just was not ready for the level of hope that I felt and energy and also, I mean, because we're in this space too, just the number of people who look like us who are up on stage, right? That was what? Wow.
Yes.
Stefani texted me while that was going on and said, "This is the blackest I've ever seen." We were all thinking that, like, we've
It
never seen.
was.
Yeah.
And finally, right? So let's throw the Robert's Rules of Order crap out the window. Let's
Mhm.
unbutton the top button. Like, let's speak to the people. Let's speak to the people. And it was beautiful. And I text Cindi that comment specifically in response to the roll call,
Mm.
like where each state like pulled out, you know, the exciting, interesting, cultural relevance, like people of color. When Lil John came down the steps, I jumped up, I was dancing. I
Yes.
mean, it was the most, it was the blackest thing, you know, that I've ever seen. And I was here for it.
Mhm.
Well, there's something I think you mentioned it already, but just this notion of, joy is not a strategy, but there is something that we as a people who've endured so much and are still able to be joyful, it feels a certain kind of way, right? Like it
Mhm.
radiates in a room because it is this real genuine, like we know how to have fun in spite of it all. We know how to have fun. And Shasti, to your point earlier about we know our assignment.
Mhm.
I mean, in a way, and I've been saying this even before Kamala was the choice, I've been saying, like, I choose joy as an act of resistance,
Yes.
right? And I
Yep.
feel like the DNC stepped into that and just said, you know what? There's been a lot of hopelessness. There's been a lot of just giving up hope. And it
Mhm.
was like, let's bring in the drum line and let's, we're going to have a party and we are going to infuse people with the energy that we need to get through this
Yes.
next, however many days are left.
I mean, really, y'all, like the energy in that convention center was palpable. It rippled through the entire space. And Stephanie, the roll call in particular, there was just this like feeling of there was individuality to each of the states. Like you could see the different personalities that came through. And everybody wanted to sort of show off their like, either their electeds or their, there's Little John, what all of that. But there was also this real just pride and like we're all here and look at the like diversity that we have, but we're proud to be in this and proud to be here. I got asked a lot by a number of different press outlets and whatnot, how did this feel compared to like 2008 Obama? And what I said is that it, certainly in 2008 there was that momentum and there was that hope and all of that. This time around, it's hope and joy, but it's exactly to what you said, Erin, which is I think it's anchored in an understanding of what we all have been through and how fragile democracy is, how hard we've all had to work for this. And I think there's an understanding of like the opportunity that we have to be able to elect the first woman of color as our president, the first Black woman, the first South Asian woman, like to be able to do that. I think we know we can't take that for granted. And it's different. I think obviously we knew what were the stakes were, when Obama was running, but we all have been through so much with 10 years of Trump that I think it's grounded in a different way. It just feels authentic. It feels even more in some ways than I think, in 2008 I was in my early 20s and I think there was some things that you just kind of thought, well, maybe we're going to do it. I don't know. And now it's like, no, we have to do it and we are going to do it. And we have to take this seriously. But the joy is the strategy of bringing more people into this so that they feel they can be a part of what we're building. And that I think has added a gravitas to all of this work in a way that I've never experienced.
Another interesting point is that who made the comment about this is the diversity that we were seeing by having the first woman of color. Wasn't it interesting to look up at the stage, and I parallel this to my own family because my own family has every race, Black, white, you name it, like that's a part of, and you got to see that on stage, and it wasn't even what do you call it, manufactured, right? Like it wasn't when the Republicans, or the MAGAs, I should say, try to act as if DEI is a problem, look at the natural beauty of order when all people are included in something this powerful. And, to your point, Shasti, the democracy, I think many of us never even, we all work hard, but so did our grandparents, right? So did our families who have fought for these moments, and to think that it could just be taken away almost doesn't seem real, and yet it's gotten to this point. And so isn't God good? I mean, like, right, the way this all happens, and always on time, right? He shows up always, because we are at the 11th hour when it comes to our democracy.
You know what else I really appreciated about the DNC, because
Mhm.
I was really worried about this when Biden was our candidate, because I could just see it happening, is it was almost like the Democratic Party was fighting a campaign that was just against Trump, and not
Right,
for
Yes.
anything.
right.
What I loved about the DNC was it felt like this is what we're for. Like,
Mhm.
here, this
Mhm.
diversity is what we're for.
Mhm.
The other thing that I loved is watching these men love their wives on stage
Mhm.
in such authentic ways.
Yes.
And meanwhile, the contrast to Vance and his wife, the contrast to Trump and Melania. I mean,
Mhm.
just nobody had to say that. Just
Right.
watching how, and again, it wasn't manufactured. Just
Right.
watching these spouses who just really, like Obama. Michelle killed it. Michelle killed
Mhm.
it, and Obama knew she killed it, right? Like, he knew that she did a better job than he did, and just the way that he loved on her, and was obviously just so proud of her, and so
Mhm.
proud of being in relationship. But then watching Kamala's husband, same thing, get emotional, and watching Tim Walz's wife. I mean, it just was
Mhm.
this beautiful expression of, we're not fighting against that thing. We're just going to be better. We're just going to be better, and we're going to lift up a better image of what's possible moving forward.
And
Mhm.
the children. I mean,
Yes,
can we not forget the children?
Mr.
Mhm.
Gus.
Whether they be young adults, whether they were the
Mhm.
little baby nieces,
Mhm.
but also the way that the children were
Mm.
loving on their
Mm.
parents.
Mhm.
The nieces loving on their auntie. Whereas in juxtaposition, right, you have, he who shall not be named, turns his head. He can't even, accept a kiss on the cheek from Tiffany. And, you know, I could, say something really icky, because, like, who would want to kiss that plug? I guess I said it. But just this idea of the way it's not even like, because there's some families where, like, they're not affectionate in public. Like,
Mhm.
they repel each other in public, right? And so if you all feel that way about each other, how do you really feel about us?
Who
The
you
people
don't know.
that you don't know, the people who come from different backgrounds than you. Like, it's
Mhm.
scary. It's
Mhm.
very under his eye, and I want no parts of it.
Mhm. Shasti, now that you've, you know, the past 2 weeks since the convention, we're getting to hear a lot more about, um, Vice President Harris's thoughts about her agenda. And um, I was so irritated with regular press on how harsh they were on her, where, she clearly not sleeping, when you are thrown into a campaign unexpectedly, and then have to get up to speed and pull off what was pulled off under
Mhm.
her leadership from a convention. But she's starting to come out more with her thoughts on her agenda, the economy, opportunity economy, the business. She's using some real intentional words that I'm paying attention to. She's when people are, what is she saying, the most qualifying, that they have an opportunity to apply for. Like, she's being very intentional about that. because we all are going to know how that's going to shake itself out when you start
Mhm.
talking about who the most qualified people are, right?
Mhm.
Um, but what are you hearing now that, the convention's over and she's pushing her agenda out there on, what she wants to tackle? What are you hearing about that? And
Yeah.
what do you believe we should all be focused on? And I do want to dive into Washington State also. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, massive kudos to both President Biden's team and to her team that the transition has been so smooth. And in the early days, I really was wanting to remind people that I always felt like, his victories were her victories, and that, the Biden administration has been one of the most progressive presidencies, certainly in my lifetime. And she's going to continue that. What I've also seen is someone who clearly comes from a middle class upbringing,
Mhm.
bringing that sensibility and that understanding of what regular people go through, what those
Mhm.
challenges are. She was basically run. Did I freeze? Um, there we go. Sorry. She basically was raised by her mom, and she
Mhm.
talked about, her mom, saving up money to buy a house. And, one of the first policies that they announced during the week of the convention was around stopping like price gouging on groceries, which
Mhm.
is just like a very, that's something that everybody can understand and relate to. And to me, just really spoke to an understanding of who we are trying to reach. During that week, we heard a lot of people talking about really investing in the middle class, expanding the middle class. That like this is where the attention needs to go, and I'm seeing her understanding that, and the policy starting to roll out in those ways to back that up, which I think is really smart. But it's what we need, and it makes sense, and it comes from lived experience on her part. And then certainly on the other days during the convention, we heard some really gut wrenching testimony from people who had lost family members from gun violence. And Cindi, you mentioned today that we're back to school and back to school shootings. I think very clearly going for a national assault weapons ban. That's very clear. Talking about reproductive rights, and hearing the horror stories of women who have suffered under red state policies where they're taking away the rights to abortion. So I think we're going to continue to see, more of what we've liked from the Biden administration, but I also think we're seeing a growth and an understanding of also a change in generation, someone who's closer to what it has been like to be, a working woman and thinking about how do you care for your family and whatnot. And that I think is very exciting and just feels like we've got someone who gets us,
Mhm.
who's like us, they're not like us. And she is someone who understands what I think so many Americans go through.
Do you think that, today I was picking up some of the typical jargon, that she's blown off and won't even give it energy to, but she talked about health insurance and people are like, oh yeah, she's coming out with her socialist agenda. And I roll my eyes and I just don't understand how you go from providing health care to people to that being socialism. Like, I just don't get that. Except that it's just a narrative to scare people into believing that we don't have rights to have. But any more, are you hearing any more about um, those type of policies that, well, any of her policies um, that we need to be concerned with that is going to be come after hard? Or are there certain things, I guess, that you're picking up that we're concerned with because she is fighting for those things?
I mean, certainly you kind of hear the pundits, even sometimes on our side already, there are the economists who are saying about like the inflation and price gouging on groceries. Are like, oh no, we can't do that because then that will destabilize the economy. And you hear some of that as a way of trying, I think, to tamp down too much of progressivism,
Mhm.
too much of helping regular people. There is still that sort of wanting to protect the sort of big bank corporate class that is in our politics. So I've definitely sort of seen that kind of climbing out and trying. And then obviously the Republicans have from the beginning, they called her the DEI president, and have, sort of thrown all this kind of, coded and not so coded language at her. The thing that's been fascinating is I feel like we struggled for months to, like, Trump was able to own news cycles in ways that we constantly just were always on the reactionary side of it, like trying to fight back. These last like 6 weeks, 2 months, we've been the story, like we've been able to take up a lot of the noise and have really been moving through it. And I feel like I think partially it's a generation change, is so savvy with how, like you said, Cindi, how she talks about these policies, that she's almost like getting ahead of them to keep them from being able, and it's not sticking, and there are ways which I feel like it's like, they say Teflon Don with Trump, and it's like, she's having kind of that moment too, where, and we came out really loud and proud from Washington State Democrats to support her as soon as Biden announced that he was not going to run again. And that was in large part because we knew the racism, we knew the sexism, we knew what was coming, and we wanted to make sure that we were standing up loud and proud in support of her. And I do feel like that across the Democratic Party, that folks recognize that and are trying really hard to stand up and not let those types of comments and things stick, where they're challenging them pretty quickly.
I also think that some of that is cultural, though. So back to this whole idea of, we should have listened to Black women. So I think a lot of how we are seeing Vice President Harris position herself and communicate is very much rooted in Black culture, collectivism, and discourse. And in some ways, I think the Democratic Party, and nationally, I'm kind of talking about here, has run away from that idea of being like, this is who we are. Like here are the stalwart supporters of the Democratic Party. This is who we are. And sort of instead kind of trying to play this safe middle ground. How can we connect to the angsty folks in middle America with who are angsty, economic angst, which again was key. It was code for racist, kind of in a sense, where how they would, just turn themselves into these machinations. And so for me, I think where the light switch has really been flipped is, again, embracing the true diversity of the Democratic Party, and not try to walk this, like, we don't want to offend, and so I think that sort of goes back to this realness, transparency, and candor that is revered in Black culture, and specifically personified by Black women.
Yep. That's
It
exactly. Go ahead, Erin.
It's interesting because I was thinking too about that, and just also the joy that is Black womanhood. When we're supported, I think it's really important that joy requires support. It requires knowing that you're being held by people. And that's something that I see too, is that, I think it's so beautiful that her husband's ex-wife supports her. I think that speaks volumes about kind of who she has around her. And one of the things I have been telling my Black female friends, wherever they are, is you want to be successful, you need to have a community. You need to have a posse, a crew that's around you. And we can be our best authentic selves when we have that crew. When you feel like you're on an island, you can't be your best self. Like it's so hard because you're
in survival mode.
Yes. But you can tell, like, she's able to thrive. She has a husband who loves her. She has stepkids who loves her. She has a sister and a brother-in-law who love her. Who can have like a sister and brother-in-law get on stage? Like, who has that kind of extended family that can get on stage and carry a crowd and speak not only with passion, but articulately and thoughtfully? And I mean, she has a crew around her. And to me, you know, I've been thinking a lot as a classroom teacher. I really value, and Stephanie, you already said this earlier, but how people treat children and how they are treated by children. And watching her, every time children are around, she goes straight to them and they come to her. They want to be held by her. They want her to just see them. But even because I have an adopted kid who's not my biological kid, how she looks at me says a lot about who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And my adopted daughter loves me to death. And I watch her stepkids and they love her. And that says a lot, because not all stepkids do love their stepmother. And it speaks a lot to her character and to what she's invested in them. And it also pushes back on JD Vance and you know, the cat ladies and all of that too, is mothering looks a lot, it looks different to different people. So sometimes it's the babies that you birth out of your body, other times it's the babies that you come to care for. And her stepchildren love her, her nieces love her. And just watching the love that people who don't have to show love are intentionally showing up to show her love tells me a lot about her character. And for me, that matters.
Amen.
And then there's today, Liz Cheney came out and said, I'm voting for her. And
I
so,
didn't see that.
yeah, that just came out on the news this
I did not see that on my bingo card. I anticipated her quietly going into a voting booth or putting a stamp on an absentee ballot. I did not anticipate
again, it speaks volumes, right? Like for someone, you know, of that conservative background, of which they probably have not a whole lot in common. And we all heard Vice President Harris, when she was asked the question, would she consider putting a Republican on the ticket, how she said yes. You know, so is this a time, Shasti, kind of back to you with what you're hearing, you know, is this a time now that we can bridge these parties without having this massive divide? You had Kinzinger come out, come forward, right? Like, you have these Republicans who, or at least have some common sense, right? Like, you know, is this a time? Is that kind of conversation happening that people are saying it's time that we stop having this division over, you know, fiscal, whatever these things are? Are you hearing any conversations like that?
I think certainly some, you know, I think definitely we're hearing more and more people being like, the Republican Party left me. You know, it's not like that party no longer represents myself. Now, you know, we hear a lot of people that are sort of, they're still tiptoeing their way into the Democratic Party. Like maybe they're still not totally certain that they're ready to identify, but you are hearing more people be like, well, but I like her, you know, or I like this person seems to be trustworthy, you know, honest, of the people, you know, like things like that like feel like they can relate to. And so I think we're certainly seeing some of that. I think we're seeing some more of the Republicans starting to break away from Trump, which was not the case, you know, even just a few months ago when the Republicans had their own primary and they had other options, and, you know, they had a woman of color as well, and still over and over and over chose Trump. And, you know, here, even in Washington State, the Republican voters of Washington State chose Trump. So, you know, I mean, look, the Republican Party of Washington State actually votes in the similar way to the Republicans in Alabama. Like, there's not a lot of difference of where that Republican Party has been and continues to be. But you're starting, I think, to see some of those Republicans that are, you know, more of the older styled, you know, Republican, fiscal conservative Republican, who are kind of like, okay, Trump is really dragging us down, and we've got to try to pull ourselves out if we're going to save ourselves at all. So
I'm sorry, I just don't understand how it's taken to this point. Like, I just don't get that. I don't understand. I don't understand. Maybe I never will. Like, how we are at the 11th hour and this fool has demonstrated over the entirety of his business life, quote unquote, of his life, that he is not somebody worth. So just the fact that people still struggle with or haven't made a decision, I just, what rock are you living under to not understand the impact of that, and what must be inside of someone's heart that they would still circle that dot with his name on it, knowing he's destroying everything and everybody around him. I don't get it. Some of the
Can I jump in?
Yeah, go ahead, Erin.
So back to, you were talking about Kamala having a Republican on her cabinet. Biden took our Secretary of State, Kim Wyman, who was a Republican. She's a really good friend of mine. She actually lived in my neighborhood until Biden took her back in DC. But Biden has already had a practice of including Republican lawmakers on his executive team. And I think Kim is a great example of that. So I think Kamala is following suit. So it's something that has already begun. There's also, and Cindi, I can't remember the name of this organization, but I had to bring a woman to a fundraiser 2 weeks ago, older white woman, and I had to pick her up in Olympia and drive her to Seattle. And in her driveway was a giant sign for, oh my gosh, not Semi Bird, but the other, who's the other conservative running for governor?
Reichert.
Yes, Dave Reichert. So she had a big Reichert sign in her yard, and I was like, oh my gosh, do I really have to take this lady to Seattle? And we get in the car, and it turns out that she and I know a bunch of people that are the same. And all of the people she knew are super moderate Republicans who are all never Trumpers. And she actually started a foundation. I wish I could remember the name of it, but they are working to elect moderate Republicans right now, and she's a never Trumper, so she will vote on our statewide ticket Republican, although she has voted for Democrats before, but she will not vote for Trump. She's voting for Kamala. And we had a really great conversation in the car about that. And I think, Cindi, I've been asking myself that question too, especially because you and I went to sister churches. So I have wondered with people in my church community, like, I just don't understand, with all the things that you said in church about what you value, I don't understand how you can justify, but for people that vote on one issue and they've been told that you must vote Republican their whole lives, they've been told you must vote Republican. And I think so many of them were also taught to not ask questions. So, oh my gosh, we're seeing him and he doesn't match, but we've been told we have to vote Republican, even though pro-life is not on the platform for the Republican Party right now. I've been trying to do some educating on that with people I know. As you guys know, I know that you voted on one issue, but that issue is not on your platform right now. So I want to challenge you to think about why you're voting that way. But for so many Republicans that I know who are church people, they have been so brainwashed to believe good Christians can only vote Republican. And so it doesn't matter who's at the top of the ticket. They justify it because it is the party that is pro-life for them. And that's the issue that they care about. And it doesn't make sense to us because we're thinking beyond that. But for folks who were raised in the church, especially if they're 40 and over, it's all they know.
And generationally,
yes,
right? Because this whole idea of sort of abortion being that issue, like this goes all the way back to segregation academies.
Absolutely, 70s. Yeah.
So this is, at this point, sort of 3 or 4 generations of the Republican Party manipulating the evangelical vote.
Yes.
And it's been really interesting. Before I jumped online, they were doing a whole story on MSNBC about evangelical Latinos now.
Yes.
And and some of the folks that they were interviewing, when asked the question, like, why are you doing this? Like, this space used to be like predominantly white. And they were like, money. So, like, not only are they manipulative, but they're also very manipulative about what they're doing out loud. It's not, Jesus came to me in a dream, no, money and the browning of America. Capitalism. Those were the 2 quotes, money and the browning of America.
Shasti. I can't even comment. I don't want to be disrespectful to people. I mean, I, I do hear you, Erin, about um, the church breeding in, the thou shalt and vote Republican and all that sort of stuff. You and I've had a lot of discussions about church, like what has gone down. And yeah, that's a whole other, that's just something else to watch and be people of faith and have to watch what does pro-life actually mean? Are you just talking about right? And
Abortion.
Right, abortion. That's just call it for what it is. That's all they're talking about is abortion, with a limited view on why abortions are done. So, and who's creating the problem? I mean, I have continued to say, clip the dick, and we wouldn't have these. We wouldn't have these sorts of problems, right? Like, I mean, why can't we just pass a law on that, right? Like, if you want to stop pregnancies, then deal with the root cause of it.
Right.
We were not ready for that. We were not ready.
Right.
I mean, mandatory vasectomies would fix it, right? Like, if you,
they're easier to reverse.
I mean, I said it jokingly, but it's a thing. Like, why are you only focused on can't get pregnant without? Yeah, I'm sorry, I caught you off guard again. I've done that a few times where.
Awesome.
But this is important for that process, and so I'm just tired of watching the women always be the ones that have to bear the consequences of it. Let him get a snip or two. Yeah, just snip it, and then we don't have to deal with that sort of stuff.
And to that end, also the same party that rails against child support. Absolutely rails against child support, and government shouldn't be in our pockets.
And education.
Small government. So, I mean, if we're supposed to be bringing all these babies into the world, against our will, then if that's what the government says, then where is the funding to take care of them? Where is the health care? Where are these babies, childcare, babies not being hungry, distracted in school because their tummies are, twisted up from hunger and they can't learn.
And so maybe the government shouldn't fund that. So your churches better fund that. And I don't see your churches funding that. Like, so I'd feel differently if there were more churches that were invested in feeding the babies before they went to school. So if you really care, Republicans who are watching this, who showed up in our state, 200 of you showed up against the food bill for kids for lunches. 200 people took time out of their day in the legislature last April to say no to school lunches for kids. So are you going to feed the babies? Because I'm sorry, I was a classroom teacher in the poorest schools in Washington State. And when kids haven't eaten, they cannot learn. And then you want to bash us as teachers for failing the children, but they can't learn when they haven't eaten. And so then what I end up doing, because I'm invested in the kids, is I spend money that I don't have to feed the babies who are in my classroom because I can't stand to see them hungry, because I actually want them to learn. So then I pay out of my little paycheck to make sure that I have protein bars and fruit in my classroom and mixed nuts, and I'm feeding the children. So my call to all of you Republicans who say that you are pro-life is, my challenge to you then is, so what's your church doing? If you don't want the government to do it, what is your church doing? If your church is doing nothing, then you need to be quiet.
And also, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing in all of your, traversing the community? How are you supporting and helping children? I mean, I could just go all the way entirely off about this as somebody that actually used to be a support enforcement officer. So anyway,
well, I just want to make sure I'm respectful of Shasti's time today. I wanted to make sure I got one more question in for you, Shasti. I wondered if you could talk, maybe clump these two issues into one answer. Can you talk about where nationally, what needs to happen over the next 60 days in order for us to hold on to the Senate and maybe take the House there? And then what specifically here in Washington State are we concerned with that we need to focus on over the next 60 days as well? So are you able to give us some insight into that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, for me, the great thing is that, Washington State is a part of us winning nationally. A lot of people write us off as a blue state, but the road to a speaker, Hakeem Jeffries, runs right through Washington State. We have 2 frontline seats right here in Washington with Kim Schreier and Marie Gluesenkamp Perez that we have to win in order. If we lose those 2 seats, then that means we've lost the House and probably the Senate.
So which ones are those? Schreier and who?
Schreier and Marie Gluesenkamp Perez. Schreier is in, Oh, good. Yes. So Schreier is the 8th Congressional District, which is kind of, East King out to Wenatchee and whatnot. And then Marie Gluesenkamp Perez is CD3, which is Southwest Washington. So Vancouver, Skamania, Pacific County, down in the south part of the state. So, absolutely, if you're here in Washington, if you can help make phone calls, knock doors, do all of that. And then nationally, the closest to us for the Senate races, John Tester in Montana. We're going to need to protect him and make sure that we get him across the finish line. And then, for battleground states, just right close to us, Nevada. Nevada has a major Senate race in keeping Jackie Rosen. And then in Arizona, we got to make sure that we're doing everything we can to win in Nevada and Arizona. Really, it's going to come down to about 6 states in terms of winning the presidency. And those are Wisconsin, Michigan, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Arizona, and then North Carolina looks like it's going to be in play. Liz Cheney made her announcement in North Carolina today. So, I think we're really hoping that we can do everything we can to win there. Here in Washington State, we literally just yesterday certified the closest primary race in Washington State's history. Dave Updegrove was running for Public Lands Commissioner, and we just finished the hand recount, and he won by 53 votes.
Oh my God.
So your vote matters.
Your vote matters.
Let me tell you it doesn't.
Yes, and we, Washington State Democrats, helped Dave's campaign with curing ballots. 24,000 ballots were cured in a matter of about a week to try to make the difference. And so, like you said, truly every single vote matters. Our governor's race, every time we've had an open gubernatorial seat, it has come down to a percentage point or 2. And so, even though I think, we're all feeling really great about Attorney General Bob Ferguson, we don't want to take it for granted. You talked about the woman who, said isn't going to vote for Trump, but has a Reichert sign. We got to make sure we're having those conversations everywhere. All of the data says that the best way to get people to vote is to talk about why you vote. Talk about why it matters to you. Talk about why you're excited, which candidates you're excited about, why it matters to participate, to do this type of work. All of that is how you do that. And having those conversations, these next 60 days, every conversation you have, everything you do, you send a postcard, you make those phone calls, you knock those doors, you help with text messages, you talk to your grocery clerk. That will be the difference between a President Kamala Harris or a President Trump 2.0, a Governor Bob Ferguson, or a Governor Reichert, or a Jamie Herrera Butler versus Dave Updegrove. All of these races really matter. And the other really exciting thing is that here in Washington State, we are on the precipice of getting a supermajority in the state legislature. We've got key state ledge races where, because of redistricting, we can potentially flip the 14th legislative district, where we have 3 incredible Latina women that are running in Yakima who represent the community. Maria Beltran, Chelsea Dimas, and Ana Ruiz Kennedy. These are places that it'll really matter if leadership changes. It'll change that community. And so, we've got really exciting, wonderful people running all across this state. And we're really hopeful that we're going to be able to make some big progress.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask one question, if I may. I have even heard of some Democratic candidates turning up in Idaho. So someone by the name of Kaylee Peterson,
Okay.
who is running as a Democrat, so millennial, rural farmer. So back to this idea of joy and hope, like there are a lot of people that are just tired of the shenanigans. So like just so many exciting candidates to be introduced to and hearing about in areas that we wouldn't necessarily see as being in play.
We will get to her then. Steph, I'm glad you brought that up. We've had Maria Beltran on. She we helped fundraise for her a little bit. But it is good to know. I really wanted you to share that because I know a lot of people are asking, what do we do? Like, what's to do something? What does that entail? And I've given several people the Indivisible contact information for Indivisible Tacoma, Indivisible Kirkland, Indivisible Eastside, because they have coordinated, and I'm speaking more now to the audience as I'm saying this, where you can find out what is happening in your local neighborhood, as Al Roker would say, what's coordinating. And then I also noticed, I'm getting a lot of phone calls for the ground game. So there's a lot of coordination going on with doorbelling. I am actually going to do some on Saturday to help with Del Benny's, but those are the little things that matter. The more, if I can go out and get to 50 doors on a Saturday, or it's probably more like 30 if I remember before I wore out. Erin, how many doors did you knock before you were worn out? Just talk but I'm saying this for the point, there's a way to get involved to help make sure these races happen. And again, to your point, Shasti, none of these can be taken for granted. So it is an all hands on deck. I had not heard about Dave getting certified. So that's good to know. I know they had recounted it. So that's awesome to hear that.
Shasti, I have a question. Can people still register to vote?
Yes. Yep. Here in Washington State, we have one of the best voting systems. You can register to vote all the way up to Election Day. You have to go into an actual elections office if you're going to do it on Election Day, but people can go online and they can register and still have plenty of time. Ballots are dropping in about 5 weeks or so. People still have time, but every moment matters, and people can get in where they fit in. Like it all matters. It all helps. Talking about it on your social media, reminding your friends and family to vote. We have the coordinated campaign that we run out of the Washington State Democrats, and Cindi, I'll make sure that you have the link so people can sign up and come. And we've got offices around the state. I have 30 organizers around the state that are ready to help train up volunteers and help them with all the resources they need to get out there and help out.
Last question for you, Shasti, is if someone has a felony, are they able to vote in the state of Washington?
Now they are. Yes, they can. Yeah, we did. Our amazing Democrats in the state legislature, last session, I think it was just last session, cleared that. And so now, yes, it is possible to be able to vote.
Because there are quite a few people who don't believe. The day before my election day, I canvassed for Hillary Clinton. And the numbers of Black men I met who, because they had felonies, had never registered to vote and didn't realize they could vote. So just to be aware to our community, don't believe the lies that you can't vote. Get your family members out. I think we've got to get people registered who were not aware that they could vote.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a good question. Thanks for asking that.
And we should say young people too, as long as they're going to be 18 by election day, they can register to vote and we can get them all ready to go. So if you've got a 17-year-old in your life right now who's going to be 18 by November, then let's get them registered as well and get them excited to participate in this history-making election. I mean, it really is. This is the most historic thing I think I've been a part of, obviously since Barack Obama. But it's going to be so incredible to be able to fill in the circle for Kamala Harris.
For us too, like who would have ever thunk? Who would have ever thunk I got to see both a Black man and a Black woman be the president of the United States, right? It's like who never even seemed possible before. So so this is so awesome. Also, we have a question that I missed coming in. Will you be discussing statewide initiatives at a later date?
I can talk about those really briefly.
Okay.
Just really quickly.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Linda, thank you very much for flagging that. So there will be 4 statewide initiatives that there's a Republican billionaire named Brian Haywood has been funding basically just to get himself a tax cut. So there will be 4 that you just need to know, vote no on all 4 of these initiatives. One deals with repealing the natural gas ban. One is about repealing the Climate Commitment Act. One is about repealing the Long-Term Cares Act, and the other one is related to the capital gains tax. So all 4, it's a vote no. Absolutely. Tell everybody in your life that it's just vote no, vote no, vote no, vote no. And it'll be at the very top of the ballot. And so we want to make sure that people don't get confused or don't get tired out, that they will vote that whole ballot and make sure that they vote no on those statewide initiatives. Because it's truly, the Republicans have basically decided that instead of running quality candidates to compete against our Democrats, they are putting all their money into repealing the work that, our folks have done, who are responsive to constituents, have done and put in place and are some of our most landmark legislation of the last decade. And I don't want Republicans to learn that they don't have to put up people who are going to be responsive to constituents, that they can just buy their way to repealing the hard work that we do to, try to improve people's lives here in Washington. So really important that we're telling everybody to vote no on those initiatives.
That's a good question. Thank you for that, Linda. Shasti, one other question that occurred to me. Is there a threat with the Attorney General race because when I looked at the numbers between Nick and the Republican that's running in that, is there concern in that race at all?
Well, I think, certainly, and we're, really thrilled that, Nick Brown made it through. Of course, love Senator Moncadingra, who is an incredible leader as well. And we're history making here too, because I believe Nick will be the first Black Attorney General for Washington State. But, all of these races, it's people forget that we really are a lot more purple than people think. And so, all of these statewide races are going to be probably, couple percentage points. So it's going to matter, and make sure that people are voting, straight down the ticket, voting for the Democrats in all of these races.
Okay.
So to that point, I've heard a lot of discourse around what the president and, say, the governor can and cannot do. Can you talk a little bit about why it is important for people to vote down ballot, and maybe what kind of help the president or governor might need to be able to move a progressive and democratic agenda forward?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm, proud that Washington State is a part of the sort of West Coast blue wall. Certainly just in recent memory, right, when Trump was in office, Washington State, we had to be the sort of sanctuary state, that our state policies were able to protect people. And, right now we're trying to be a sanctuary state on reproductive rights, where we're already seeing in places like Idaho that folks are having to come across the border into Washington to be able to get any kind of reproductive care. And it's overcrowding our hospitals and whatnot. So it absolutely matters what happens here in Washington State. We are a laboratory for progressive policy. We are able, the Climate Commitment Act is one of the most progressive environmental pieces of legislation in the entire country. And so it matters. And, look, I want to fully believe that, come January, we are going to be inaugurating President Kamala Harris and Vice President Tim Walz. But in the disaster scenario that does not happen, we have got to make sure that we have strong leadership here in Washington State to keep us as a safe place for fighting against, all the horror show that is going to come from that Trump presidency. The one thing that he has learned is not to wait. There will be no tempering. There will be no slowing down. They will not wait for, whether or not there's any checks and balances. They are going to steamroll right towards authoritarianism. And we have to make sure that we have coverage and have good leaders here in Washington State.
Yes. And because we are on a roll for joy, let's say that Vice President Kamala Harris wins. Is that enough? Like, is our work done? What do we need
No,
to be doing to
absolutely.
ensure, again, that we get federal, legislation and administrative policies and procedures that support a democratic and progressive agenda?
Thank you for saying that, Stephanie. You all know, Erin, you ran here in state. You know that really the difference makers are so often, they're the most local leaders. They're, on the school board, they're on the city councils, they're doing the most local work because they're the closest to community, closest to the pain points. And so they're able to fully be there for our people here. And I think we always have to be pushing our leaders, it'll be, wonderful. I'm always proud when we have Democratic leadership at the top of government, but change doesn't happen without pushing. And we will, as much as it is thrilling and exciting to have the idea of a President Kamala Harris, she will need us to help keep pushing her forward and giving her the cover to be more progressive, to continue to deliver for working families, for all of us in community. We can't just go silent or go back to sort of thinking that our job is done when we get through November. In fact, in some ways, the job is just beginning, because she's going to have all those daggers, everything coming at her, and she's going to need us to protect her and stand up for her and support her, like Erin was saying.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Shasti, you went way over. So I really appreciate that you stayed on with us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you
for being here. And as always, your information is so valuable to the state, and where people can come and get, live, up to date, what's happening straight from the beautiful woman's mouth who's leading this party here in the state. Thank you for that. We are at the hour, so I'm going to defer the remainder of the show till next week. So let me just say thank you to Erin and Stefani for joining me this evening, to our viewers who joined and who will be watching the show. Thank you for tuning in and following this every week. We have a lot of work to do. I am going to stay on top of the feedback that Shasti gave so that we can pay attention to and help out on some of these other races. Money donating to these campaigns is critical. Again, the ground game is happening everywhere. There's a way to get involved to try to help. Nothing should be taken for granted. I think we heard that message loud and clear. So thank you all for joining this evening, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Half that up in Saks, I favor black businesses. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's black. Yeah. Yeah.